All of us get tired and weary in trying to do the right things. Well, I want you to understand you can pray for strength and God is listening. Today we're going to talk about the power prayer for strength. Now, if you want access to more power prayers, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, and actually you'll have access to hundreds of our teaching videos. Well, the prayer for strength comes from the book of Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah had the impossible assignment of going back to Jerusalem, which had been crushed and flattened by the enemies, and the walls were knocked down, so they had no protection to rebuild the city. And his job was to rebuild the walls of the city, a very difficult task. But what made it even more difficult was there was a man named Sanballat who had some friends and some others who gave him constant opposition. Well, Sanballat did a series of things. First of all, when Nehemiah came back to rebuild the walls, he made fun of him and ridiculed him and mocked him. Beyond that, when he started building, they criticized all of his efforts. Then he gathered a coalition to intimidate Nehemiah and to cause division among his workers. And it succeeded. His workers began to divide and to not be willing to follow Nehemiah's leadership. Things were not going well. Beyond that, when Nehemiah wouldn't quit, he requested a series of meetings to distract Nehemiah, possibly to get him to come to a meeting where he would kidnap him and kill him. Well, then that didn't work, so he posted an open letter of false accusations about Nehemiah's motives to get everyone to turn against Nehemiah. So, everything's not going well at all for Nehemiah as he tries to rebuild these walls. I want to tell you, when you're trying to do what God has called you to do, whether it's in your family or on your business or in your ministry, sometimes God doesn't make it easy. It's hard, it's difficult, and you will face opposition if you're doing the right thing. But Nehemiah knew what to do. He was a man of prayer. He prays in almost every chapter of Nehemiah, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 5. And here in chapter 6, we find him praying again. And he prays a very short and simple prayer. He explains to God what's going on. And then in verse 8, he says this. Verse 9, he says, "But now, my God, strengthen me. Strengthen me. Give me strength." That's not a long prayer. It doesn't have to be, but it's a powerful prayer. This is asking God to give you the strength to keep doing the right thing, to keep pressing on. Now, I think it's interesting. He didn't ask God to remove all the enemies, let there be a plague, let them all die. He didn't ask God for that. I might have. He didn't ask God to give this job to somebody else. It was too hard for him. He was tired of it. He didn't need the lies and the ridicule and the false accusations. He didn't ask God to send down a bunch of angels to build the wall for him. He asked God to do something on the inside of him. Give me strength. Sometimes the miracles God gives are what he does in us and not necessarily what he does for us. Well, God did give him the miracle of strength. God answered his prayer. And we read just a few verses later, in verse 16, it says these words, "The walls were completed in 52 days." The wall was completed in 52 days. Now, engineers tell us that's a miracle. That's unbelievable. God answered his prayer for strength. I want to encourage you today. If you're weary, you're worn, you're beaten, you're battered, you're broken down because of your situation, ask God to give you strength today. That's a prayer, a power prayer he likes to answer.